When the first snow fell over Leningrad in September 1941, no one knew it would mark the beginning of one of the longest and most brutal sieges in human history. The city, once vibrant with art, music, and the hum of trams, now echoed with silence and the distant thunder of artillery. German forces had surrounded it completely. 3 million civilians trapped inside, cut off from the world. No food, no fuel, no escaping. Within weeks, rations were reduced to near starvation levels, 125 grams of bread a day. But this wasn't bread as people knew it. It was made from sawdust, cellulose, and whatever remnants of flour remained. Hunger gnawed at the citizens more fiercely than the bombs. People chewed wallpaper paste, boiled leather belts, even scraped glue from furniture to survive. The once proud city of Leningrad became a graveyard of the living. Bodies froze in the streets, stiff as stone, because there was no strength left to bury them. Trams stood motionless, their windows shattered by explosions, their passengers still inside, frozen in time. The winter of 1941 was the coldest in decades, temperatures dropping to -30 degrees Celsius. People tore down wooden fences and furniture to burn for warmth, yet the smoke of desperation filled the air more than heat ever could. But amid the suffering, there was defiance. The people refused to surrender. The city's defenders, soldiers, factory workers, teenagers, manned anti-aircraft guns while starving. In the center of Leningrad, musicians of the radio orchestra prepared for something unthinkable. Under siege, half of them dead or too weak to play, they gathered to perform Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, the Leningrad Symphony. Their fingers trembled, their faces hollow, yet the music rose through the air like a heartbeat of resistance. Loudspeakers broadcast it across the city, and even German lines heard it. It was not a concert, it was a declaration: Leningrad lives. Then came the Road of Life, the only lifeline across the frozen surface of Lake Ladoga. Trucks crept over the ice at night, headlights off, under artillery fire. Each trip risked everything. If the ice cracked, the truck, and all inside, vanished beneath the freezing black water. Yet thousands of tons of flour and food made it through, and thousands of starving people were evacuated out. The ice road became the artery that kept the city barely alive. But as 1942 arrived, the toll deepened. Entire families vanished overnight, not from bombs, but from hunger. Neighbors stopped speaking to one another. The sound of crying children became rare. Most had no energy left to cry. Dogs, cats, birds, gone. Food was replaced by imagination. People dreamed of bread. They whispered about soup that never existed. In one small apartment, a young mother named Anya clutched her son, Sasha, too weak to stand. She had not eaten in days, saving her ration for him. The snow fell softly outside the cracked window, muting the sound of distant shelling. She sang to him, her voice faint, just to remind him that life still existed. But Sasha's eyes no longer followed her voice. He had already drifted beyond hunger. As she realized the silence beside her, the city seemed to exhale a single frozen breath, a moment of stillness before another siren began to wail in the distance. And outside, somewhere across the white expanse of Lake Ladoga, the ice began to crack. The ice cracked like thunder, echoing through the night as another supply truck plunged into the frozen depths of Lake Ladoga. The Road of Life claimed lives as often as it saved them, yet every night more trucks set out, guided only by faint stars and hope. Beneath them, the lake groaned like a living thing, shifting and splitting under the weight of survival. Each driver knew, one wrong sound, one misplaced tire, and they would vanish into darkness forever. Inside Leningrad, the situation had become unbearable. By early 1942, starvation had reached its peak. The official death count rose by thousands every single day. The city morgues overflowed, and death notices stopped being written. There were simply too many. People began to disappear quietly from homes, from lines outside bakeries, from the snow-covered benches near the Neva River. And then came whispers of what desperation had forced some to do. Police records later revealed over 2,000 cases of cannibalism. Some were too horrifying to describe. But for those trapped in the nightmare of hunger, survival had lost its moral boundaries. Families locked their doors not just from the cold, but from each other. Hunger changed the very nature of humanity inside the walls of Leningrad. Yet amid the nightmare, life stubbornly persisted. Children attended makeshift schools in basements, writing lessons with frozen fingers. Hospitals treated patients without electricity, performing surgeries by candlelight. Factory workers kept producing weapons, bullets and shells forged by hands trembling with weakness. Every heartbeat, every small act, was a defiance against death itself. Anya, now alone in her small apartment, joined a volunteer group delivering rations across the city. She carried sacks barely heavier than air, delivering portions that could fit in a closed fist. But each visit mattered. She watched as families broke into tears over a single piece of bread, as strangers shared crumbs like treasure. It was not the food that kept them alive, it was the act of giving. Outside, the German artillery never stopped. Shells rained daily, collapsing what little shelter remained. The sound became so constant that silence itself became strange, a silence that carried fear. When the shelling paused, it meant an air raid was coming. By the end of 1942, a faint flicker of change began to appear. Soviet forces were slowly regaining ground. The frozen road over Lake Ladoga had turned into a more stable supply route, bringing not just food but hope. For the first time in a year, citizens received real bread, 300 grams a day. It wasn't much, but after months of starvation, it felt like a feast. When the first spring thaw came, the snow melted to reveal what the cold had hidden, bodies everywhere. In courtyards, stairwells, even playgrounds. Leningrad was a city of ghosts, but the living refused to join them. People began planting gardens in the rubble. Flowers grew between shattered bricks. Children played beside burnt-out tanks. Still, the siege was far from over. The German army tightened its grip again, launching new offensives. Each time the people thought it might end, the guns started anew. The road over the lake, once frozen, now had to be crossed by boat, under constant bombardment. And as the year turned to 1943, another brutal winter returned. Supplies thinned. Rations dropped again. The people of Leningrad faced the unthinkable once more. Another year of hunger, another year of death. But something had changed in their eyes. They no longer dreamed of surrender. Even as the bombs fell, even as hunger returned, a quiet strength burned behind every hollow face. And far beyond the frozen city, the Soviet army was preparing for something massive, an operation that would finally break the ring around Leningrad. The winter of 1943 settled over Leningrad like a cruel memory. Snow drifted into the ruins, blanketing the city's scars, but nothing could hide the suffering beneath. After nearly 900 days under siege, the people had learned to live with hunger, to endure bombardment, to survive on willpower alone. The German blockade still choked the city, yet something was shifting beyond the front lines. Soviet forces were gathering, preparing for a final strike, an operation that could end the nightmare once and for all. In January 1943, the first breakthrough came. Operation Iskra, Spark. Soviet armies on both sides of the frozen Neva River surged forward, smashing through German lines with everything they had left. The city's defenders, hearing the thunder of distant artillery, realized the unimaginable might be happening. The siege was breaking. When the first supply train reached Leningrad a few weeks later, it carried more than food. It carried proof that hope had survived. Anya stood among a small crowd at the train station, watching as boxes were unloaded by soldiers whose faces were bright with exhaustion. Flour, sugar, salt, words that had become dreams. She held a loaf of bread in her hands, warm for the first time in 2 years. Around her, people wept openly, not for joy, but for everything they had lost to reach this moment. But the siege wasn't over yet. The Germans still held the southern lines, their artillery still pounding the city daily. Streets remained empty, buildings hollowed. The brief taste of survival had come at the cost of nearly 1 million civilian lives. And though the blockade had been pierced, it wasn't until a full year later, in January 1944, that the final offensive began. Operation January Thunderstorm. The Soviet attack was relentless. Artillery thundered across frozen plains as the Red Army advanced, pushing the Germans back mile by mile. In the city, the starving survivors listened as the sound of shelling began to fade for the first time. Then came the news that no one dared believe. The siege had been lifted. Leningrad was free. After 872 days, the blockade was broken. People emerged into the streets like ghosts waking from a long, frozen dream. The air was silent, the snow falling softly on a city that had refused to die. Children born during the siege saw daylight without the sound of explosions. For the first time in years, bakeries opened their doors. Fresh bread filled the air with a scent so powerful it made people cry. Anya walked through the streets of her city, past the shattered buildings, past the graves covered by snow, and reached the Neva River. The water, once frozen solid with the road of life carved across its back, now flowed freely. She dropped a small piece of bread into it, whispering Sasha's name. The river carried it away, joining the countless souls lost to hunger, to cold, to war. In the months that followed, Leningrad began to rebuild. Music returned to its halls, trams once again rattled down Nevsky Prospect, and flowers bloomed between the ruins. Yet every stone, every street, carried the memory of the siege, of the hunger, the courage, and the unyielding spirit that refused to break. Historians would later call it one of the longest and most devastating sieges in history. Nearly 1 million civilians perished, not by bullets, but by starvation and cold. And yet, against all reason, the city endured. Leningrad did not surrender. It survived, not because of weapons or armies, but because of people like Anya, who chose to live when everything told them to give up. And long after the guns went silent, the snow of Leningrad still fell, quiet, endless, and remembering.